everybody, and welcome to another ASMR video here on the channel. In tonight's video we are returning with some Reddit scary stories. I have a popular series on my channel. I think the second most recent video was ghost stories, and then the most recent one we did, which was a fair few videos ago now, was Let's Not Meet. So we are going to be returning to the No Sleep Reddit page, which, if you are unfamiliar, these tend to be more fictitious and more well crafted and well written than, say, on Let's Not Meet. So hopefully you find it scary, and hopefully you find it relaxing. Without further ado, let's get into story number 1. This first story is titled, "I thought my boyfriend was the love of my life, until I discovered he was drugging me at night." This was the highest rated story from the last month, posted 2 days ago, so I have high hopes. "Lately, I've been waking up still exhausted. Even if I went to bed early, I'd wake up feeling like I hadn't slept in days. Trying to get out of bed for work was almost impossible, which was strange for me because I was always a high-energy sort of person. A few hours of sleep and I was always good to go. I was at a loss as to what was happening. After a barrage of tests, even my doctor couldn't find anything wrong with me. The only recent change in my life was my boyfriend who had moved in, and I was sharing a bed for the first time in my life. Stephen was the first love of my life, and this was my first serious relationship. I didn't want to spoil things by making him sleep in the spare room. I liked having Stephen around. He made a real fuss over me, and he would bring me chamomile tea every night before bed. The pain in my hip was sharp and pulsated up to the right side of my body. I jumped from my bed and nearly collapsed to the floor as I struggled to get to the bathroom. 'Stephen, can you get in here?' I cried. A big, dark bruise covered my hip, as if I was assaulted in my sleep with a metal bar. 'What's wrong?' Stephen said as he came rushing into the room. Did I fall out of bed or something? Stephen had a weird expression on his face. I could swear he looked guilty about something. Probably. I don't know. His response was dismissive, which sent my brain spiraling with all sorts of thoughts. 'This is not normal, Stephen. I think there's something wrong with me.' 'You should probably see a doctor then,' he coldly said, before quickly leaving the bathroom. My doctor was still at a loss and suggested I should see someone who could rule out anything nefarious. Stephen was still dismissive of me as we drove to the hospital. 'I'm sure it's nothing. You're probably just stressed out from work. People don't wake up with bruises over stress,' I angrily thought to myself. The doctor at the hospital took my blood and did all sorts of tests on me, including a stress test. I should have been happy when the tests came back clear, but it only made me feel like I was losing my mind. Something was definitely wrong with me. 'I would prescribe you sedatives, but your blood work shows you're already on nitrazepam,' explained the doctor. I was dumbstruck and wasn't sure what the doctor was talking about. I have never taken so much as a painkiller in my life. The doctor's face looked how I felt. He took out his charts and looked over them again. 'No, you definitely tested positive for nitrazepam, which is a powerful sedative.' Later that evening, as I sat in bed, a million different thoughts ran through my head. How was that even possible, I thought to myself. As I sat there, Stephen walked in with my chamomile tea, and just as I was about to put it to my lips, I was struck by the most unnerving thought. The realization that my boyfriend was drugging me hit me like a ton of bricks, and filled me with a dread I had never felt before. I emptied the contents of the cup down the sink in the bathroom before jumping back into bed. "Was it hot enough for you?" asked Stephen as he jumped into bed beside me. "Perfect as always." I felt as if I was lying beside a complete stranger. Had I ever really known him, I thought to myself, as I lay there terrified he was doing unimaginable things to me while I slept. I must have drifted off at some stage because when I woke up the room was a mess and Stephen was nowhere to be seen. My body ached all over and it felt like I was in a fight. What the hell was he doing to me in my sleep, I thought. I had made the decision to go to the police, but I needed evidence or it was simply my word against his. I'd purchased a hidden camera and set it up in the bedroom, pointing it towards the bed. I woke up exhausted as usual, which unfortunately meant you had done something to me while I slept, but I had it on camera. He had done something to me. I opened my laptop to check the footage. For the first couple of hours sleep, nothing happened. For a moment I had hoped I was imagining everything until I watched myself jolt from the bed. At first I couldn't believe what I was doing. It felt like I was watching a horror movie as I watched myself crawl up the bedroom wall, like some possessed demon. I continued to crawl up the wall, onto the ceiling, looking over Stephen like I was ready to pounce on him. Stephen woke and it was strange watching him because it was like he was prepared for what was happening and didn't seem fazed by it. He took a stick out from under the bed as I bounced from the ceiling, and he spent the next hour fighting me off. I watched as he subdued me on the bed before pulling out handcuffs and cuffing me to the bed. I looked at the marks on my wrists, which made sense now. As soon as Stephen came home from work, I ran and threw my arms around him. "Why didn't you tell me that you were going through this every night?" Stephen shrugged his shoulders. "I thought you knew, and usually the drugs I was giving you made things a little easier. Why are you even still with me? My last girlfriend was a jealous psychopath. You're a walk in the park compared to her." I'm not gonna lie, I got major chills from that plot twist because I just assumed Stephen was gonna be the bad guy, but that got me a little bit. But what a man is Stephen, because I would be out of there so quickly. Goodness gracious me. This next story is titled, "My daughter has been prying at the door handle every night. It's gone from adorable to disturbing." I remember the first time I heard it. Click, click. "Honey, what's that?" I asked my wife Carmen, after waking up in the middle of the night to a strange sound. "What's what?" she replied in a groggy state, frustrated that I had woken her so late. But the sound had stopped. The next night I heard it again. Click, click. What could that possibly be, I wondered as I woke up my wife again. This time she heard it. It sounded like the doorknob. But by the time we walked over to it, the sound had stopped. Luckily for me, back when I lived in the city, I'd always gotten into the habit of locking my bedroom door, and that tradition continued well into moving into my wife's apartment, and even our current home in the suburbs. The following night, we didn't hear the sound. Perhaps we were both in too deep of a sleep, or maybe it didn't happen that night, but either way we thought the strange occurrence was behind us. anyone asked. "It most certainly is," I replied, a chill going down my spine, as the recurring sound was beginning to genuinely terrify me. This time I tiptoed over to the door, careful not to alert whoever was turning it, and opened it quickly, only to find my 8-year-old daughter just standing there staring at me. "Christy?" I asked. "Yes, Dad," she replied. "What are you doing, dear? You nearly scared me to death." "I missed you and Mummy. It was so adorable that I nearly forgot how creepy the sounds of the previous nights had been. That's all." But then she simply turned and walked away, saying, "Good night, Daddy." I climbed back into bed and let out a sigh of relief, relieved that my daughter was the source of the sound. But the next day I started to think about it more, about the number of times it had happened, and how after claiming to miss us, she simply walked away. So when it happened again the next night, I didn't open the door. Instead, I simply tiptoed over to it and listened. Click, click. I heard my daughter tugging at the door handle, twisting and turning it, in a clear attempt to pry it open, while we were sleeping, or at least she must have assumed. That's when the whole thing began to actually terrify me. If she was trying to open the door and get into the bedroom while my wife and I were asleep, what did she intend to do? I became obsessed with that thought, to the point where I couldn't fall back asleep that night, and hatched a plan to get to the bottom of it. So the next night I did what any rational parent would do when their child was uncharacteristically twisting at their bedroom doorknob every night, and left the door unlocked. And so, after pretending to fall asleep, I lay in bed, waiting, passing the time on my phone so as to not fall asleep. Until a few hours later when, in the middle of the night, I heard a new sound. Not that of the door handle twisting and turning back and forth. No, this time, I simply heard the sound of the door handle turning, followed by the squeaky door opening. Click, screech. I immediately turned off my cell phone and shut my eyes, just far enough so that I could see through them, and pretended to sleep. What happened next still haunts me. Lying there in the dark, my eyes squinting, I saw the blurred shape of my daughter open the door, close it behind her, and slowly walk over to my wife's side of the bed. She must miss her mother after all, I thought to myself, giving her the benefit of the doubt. Until I carefully turned my head, just slowly enough so that my daughter didn't realise I was looking, and saw my 8-year-old daughter reach behind her, removing from her pyjamas a kitchen knife. She held it up above her head and swung it down towards my sleeping wife, not before I was able to reach my arm out and catch the blade in my hand, letting out a large scream. "Ah, Christy, what are you doing?" But she didn't reply. She simply let out a loud hiss and seemingly slithered away out our bedroom door, through the hallway and back into her bedroom, where we heard her own bedroom door slam. We locked Christy in her bedroom that night before my wife drove me to the hospital, as I relayed the night's events, my impaled hand more than enough evidence to convince her of what had happened. I would like to say that after we got back, my daughter returned to normal. The sound of the door handle stopped, and we went back to being a family, living out our lives happily ever after. But when we got home early that morning, Christy had broken through her bedroom door and escaped from the house, never to be seen again. this day I wonder where my daughter might be, still locking my door every night. I can only hope that others do the same. I mean, obviously, clearly he was doing the right thing locking his door, but I find it really strange. I was going to comment midway, but I don't want to break the tension. Is that normal to lock your kid out of your room? Like, what if they were in trouble, if they had a nightmare and wanted to come in? Like, I find that kind of odd, and that this guy was creeped out by it. I know eventually his intuition was right and it is a story, but I find that strange. But whatever. She's gone now, no worries. Story number 3 is titled, My Tinder Date Made Me Take a Shower in Front of Her. There was no bio on Ruth's profile, only pictures, and within a handful of messages she'd asked me over to her place. Straight out of the gate there was 2 red flags, but she swore she wasn't a catfish, so I suggested we grab a cheeky pint first. That way if a hairy biker turned up and made kissy faces at me, I could make a speedy getaway through the fire exit. Ruth looked like a Greek goddess in her thigh-high skirt and trench coat. She had these stunning onyx eyes that almost seemed to glow in the dinky little pub. Every time she tossed her hair, the other drinkers stole glances in the back bar mirror. She looked different from the photo, sure, but still leagues above me. I went for a hug, which she redirected into a firm handshake. Ruth wore thick winter gloves, even though the fireplace in the corner was roaring. As I caught a trace of her scent, fresh and lovely, a sensible voice at the back of my mind screamed, "What's the catch?" Surely any second now she'd trick me into emptying my bank account. Crap, maybe she'd already swiped my credit card. I patted my pockets, wallet, phone, Pokemon keychain, all there. Already the marshal waving that 3rd red flag was a speck in the rearview mirror. The bartender took our orders. I asked for a pint of Guinness, whereas Ruth stuck with tap water. Then we eased into a conversation about our lives. When I started telling her about life in the ID game, she yawned sarcastically. Chuckling, I said, "Well, what do you do then?" "I'm between jobs." "Between what and what?" "Between surgeon and anything that doesn't involve bodily fluids." I thought they might have warned you about those in medical school." I didn't always have a problem with them. There was a traumatizing experience. She shuddered as if reliving a painful memory. "Anyway, let's talk about your sex life." Caught off guard, I spat a mouthful of Guinness all over the counter. An agitated Ruth grabbed a wet wipe from her pocket, cleared the mess, and then readjusted the placemats and ashtray so everything aligned perfectly. The ginger bartender side-eyed her but said nothing. The beautiful brunette told me she had a bunch of kinks, and I'd be lying if I told you my heart didn't flutter a little. She asked whether I was ready for another drink. I was, although I took small, steady sips because I never could handle my alcohol. Any more than 4 pints usually resulted in me clinging onto the toilet bowl like a life raft. Finally, I just came out with what was nagging at me. "Ruth, don't take this the wrong way, but are you real? Like, what's the catch here? Am I gonna wake up tomorrow missing a kidney?" That made her chuckle. "I'll be honest, there is a catch. I'll tell you if you promise not to make fun of me." I crossed my heart. She leaned close, pushed her pouty lips right up against my ear and said, "I'm a clean freak, like a major clean freak. If you come back to my place tonight, I need you to wash yourself the second we get there." I As her gloved finger ran along my shirt collar, she fought the urge to retch. Those clothes will need cleaned too. I've got a fresh pair you can borrow, and you must brush your teeth. Also, have you got an earwax remover with you? If not, you can borrow one from my emergency kit. I asked whether she was serious. Deadly. I absolutely cannot stand filth. I need you spotless. Sound good? A winning lottery ticket had blown into my hand. I finished my pint in one long gulp, wiped away my foam moustache and said, "Sounds great." In the front of her Volvo, Ruth handed me a breath mint, probably because a trace of my aunt's famous cottage pie lingered on my breath. She drove west out of town toward an ultra-modern house standing against the forest. The straight angles of the white building looked oddly juxtaposed against the pine trees, and there was an angular barrier around back keeping the vermin at bay. The sterile stench of disinfectant stung my nostrils the second we stepped through the front door. Everything was meticulously organised, all straight lines and spotless, like something from an IKEA catalogue. You could have performed open heart surgery in any room. There wasn't a single piece of furniture not covered in plastic, and 2 stuffed kittens patting invisible strings stood guard in the downstairs landing. "Aren't they cute?" Ruth asked when she noticed me staring. It's like she occupied an alternative, shrink-wrapped universe. She made me kick off my shoes, then I followed her to the end of the hall. Standing in the middle of the bathroom, she watched as I stripped off. Her neutral expression stung. She grabbed my clothes into a zip-locked bag which she held away from herself like radioactive waste, and then she provided clear instructions about which soap and shampoo I needed to use. I bit down on the temptation to tell her I'd been washing myself for years, and stepped into the shower. Ruth left a white linen shirt and a pair of jeans folded neatly over the towel rack. The earwax remover on the edge of the sink operated like something out of Star Trek. I figured out the settings eventually though. In the lounge, she handed me a shot of something fruity and sour. We clinked glasses and drank. The liquid burned on the way down. I went to sit on the sofa, but the plastic made it slicker than a water slide. I fell to the ground, and before I could pick myself up, my head got heavy and the air became stale. What happened next is a blur. 1 minute the ground was shifting beneath my feet. Next I'm flat on my back. My legs were stuck. Alcohol was sloshing around the pit of my stomach, and breathing was borderline impossible. I made myself look down, a surprisingly difficult process. Past the end of the bed, Ruth rose into view, a mean-spirited grin on her face. She was encasing my legs with shrink wrap like an Egyptian mummy, gradually working her way north. I opened my mouth, but no words came out. "Shh, this won't take long," she said. She swung her leg over my midsection, straddling me. Then she leaned forward and pushed her lips against my ear. "Don't worry, I'm going to take care of you. You look so handsome, all lovely and spotless. I'm just making sure you stay that way. Forever." Her tongue probed the inside of my ear, and then she went to fetch medical equipment from the corner of the room. My brain couldn't piece the mess together, but I knew I needed to get out of there. Fast. I tried flexing my leg muscles, but lacked the strength. Ruth's arms clamped tight around my ankles. "Stop. You're messing everything up." With all the energy I could summon, I thrashed from side to side until I fell off the bed. The wooden floor Instead, a great flood of vomit shot out as if I launched by a supercharged sprinkler. Chunks of cottage pie flew in every direction. A fountain of half-digested beef mince, onions, carrots, and garlic. Ruth rushed over to restrain me, but I rolled away, and as I did, her shoes skidded through the rancid contents of my stomach, and she fell. The germaphobe popped right back up. She looked at her palms, then the wet patches all down her back, and then her throat made this strangled sound like a cat hacking up a fur ball. She grabbed a set of wet wipes and started scrubbing herself clean, furiously. Sensing an opportunity to escape, I crawled away like a worm, leaving behind a snail trail of barf. "Get back here," Ruth screamed. She physically couldn't stop scrubbing her hands long enough to come after me. I crawled down the hall around a bend. At one point I needed to use the crown of my head to force a door open. The entire time I was coughing and trying to keep that morning's breakfast from creeping on my throat. Soon I was conscious enough to realise my left arm was free, whereas the right was pinned against my torso. To my left was the kitchen. Maybe there was a sharp object that I could cut the shrink wrap with. I fumbled towards a central island, crawled up the side and pulled on a drawer. Cutlery fell all around me with a series of metal clangs, followed by the drawer. My free hand dug through the bar for a knife, finding only spoons. Finally I grabbed a fork and stabbed at the wrap until my other arm came free. I was like a butterfly emerging from its cocoon. Footsteps came shuffling towards the kitchen. Freeing my legs would take way too long. They still only had a few inches of wiggle room. I would be at Ruth's mercy. Just then something rancid slid up my throat, so I opened my mouth and spat a fat, sticky oyster of what had once been scrambled eggs and bacon, but now looked like an alien life form into my palm. The beautiful psycho burst through the door. In her hand was a syringe. She launched herself on top of me. My left hand caught her forearm at the last possible second, while the right smeared my biological weapon across her face. As the vomit omelette dripped from her cheek in fat glops, she released the needle and went into furious convulsions. Quickly I rolled on top of her, grabbed the fallen drawer and bashed her across the side of the skull. I did this until her eyes rolled back, then I crawled away on my elbows. In the hall there was a phone on top of a side table. I punched in 999. The operator couldn't understand me but sent a squad car anyway. I remembered telling myself to stay awake in case my kidnapper recovered. But here my memory jump cuts to a circle of emergency responders staring down at me. The officers had a hard time believing my story. A concussed Ruth said I went crazy and attacked her. On the way to the station they took us to the hospital to patch up our cuts and bruises. Everybody seemed to believe I was the aggressor until the police searched the area surrounding the house. In the forest, they spotted a pack of rats scurrying around some bushes, and beneath it there was a body, partially buried, badly decomposed, and wrapped in plastic. A post-mortem confirmed it was the corpse of a local man who disappeared 6 months earlier. I'd seen his mother crying on TV. There were holes in the crotch and left arm of his shrink-wrap prison, where they believe a catheter and IV drip had been inserted, so Ruth could keep the poor guy alive, but in a state which prevented him from contaminating her perfect house. Ruth is denying any wrongdoing. Hopefully the prosecutors get their act together soon, although I'm told it could take a year before sentencing. I'm still on the road to recovery mentally speaking, but I'm ready to start looking for love again. except this time I'll be careful not to ignore any red flags. And the final story of today's video is my mum is being evicted for violating her apartment's no dog policy. She has no dog. Just realised I look hella sweaty in the on camera. It's because I'm very sweaty. Funny that. The trouble started when a really nice lady moved into the apartment across the hall. Mrs. Armstrong. She lets me and my mum call her Amanda because she likes us. Is in her 70s and used to be a nurse. The day we met, she invited us over for chili con carne. My mum said Amanda was a dying breed and that very few people acted so neighbourly anymore. As I wolfed the chili down, Amanda mentioned her planned trip to Amsterdam. Mum joked she should visit the sex museum to get some inspiration. Don't you mean torture museum? Amanda replied, laughing. I didn't really get the joke. After the meal, Amanda cleared our plates. I excused myself to use the bathroom but opened the wrong door. That's how I met Benji. Benji is a blonde Pomaboo, which is a type of dog. He chased me down the hall, growling and barking. Luckily, Mum zipped over in a flash. She used to train special dogs that helped blind people, which meant animals loved her. If she walked into a lion's den, the lions would probably roll over and ask her to scratch the soft fur on their bellies. As she petted Benji, I ate chocolate cake. Mum always said I should try being nice by asking people questions, so I asked Amanda about a picture on the wall and her eyes went misty. I asked Mum if I did something wrong, but Amanda promised everything was okay. She said the picture was of her daughter who got sick and died a long time ago. Like Amanda, the girl was very pretty, except she had red hair, not white. Mum got choked up telling Amanda about my dizzy spells and migraines. Because I got brainstorm clouds every few weeks, I couldn't move out after I finished school, but Mum explained how I always helped with the bills. A nice man called Mr. McCann owns a hotel nearby, and he lets me work in its restaurant sometimes. Mr. McCann doesn't have a problem with me taking time off whenever I'm sick. I'll admit I'm very lucky to have Mum. She always helps nurse me back to health. After Amanda told us about her daughter, she stayed quiet for a while. To make her feel better, I said, "Don't be sad. I can tell from how much Benji loves you. Your daughter was lucky to have you as a mother." After that, Amanda gave me an extra piece of cake. "Oh, one more thing," she said as she walked us to the door. "Please don't mention Benji to anybody." The landlord, Mr. White, was friendly, but he didn't like animals. Mum promised her secret would be safe with us. And then back home she said, "That was a nice thing you said back there." Sometimes Mr. White lived in the apartment below ours. He worked as a doctor but owned a bigger house in the country, so he only stayed there whenever he got too tired to drive home. Mum said this was good because having somebody stomp around downstairs would make my migraines worse. Mr. White always let us pay our rent late if we didn't have much money that month. In January, Mr. White died of a heart attack. This made me sad because he always left us treats and a nice card on Christmas. Mum told me his son, a man also called Mr. White, inherited the property, and that she hoped nothing would change. The day the moving vans appeared, Mum and Amanda looked nervous. Knew Mr. White planned on living downstairs all the time. This meant Amanda needed to keep Benji inside and only take him for walks when she knew the coast was clear. I said knew Mr. White might have liked animals more than his dad, but Mum said sometimes it's better to keep your mouth shut about these things. To reach our apartment, you needed to go through the main hall a set of stairs beside Mr. White's door, and the day after he moved in, he came out just as me and Mum arrived with our shopping bags. He kept asking Mum if she had a husband. Then he pointed at me and said, "What's his problem?" "He doesn't have an effing problem," Mum shouted, her face all red. Then she dragged me upstairs. I said Mr. White must be super friendly, because friendly people ask people questions. But she said he didn't have friendship on his mind. I asked why Mr. White thought I had a problem, and she grabbed my hands and said, "There's nothing wrong with you, Danny." She explained because I was sick for most of my childhood, I never got to spend time with the other kids, which meant I still had lots to learn about communication. Mr. White started cornering Mum at the stairs a lot. She said he must have been listening for her. She started tiptoeing. This worked for a while, but then he just started knocking on our door. He'd say things like, "Is the water pressure okay?" or "Did everybody's internet drop or just mine?" One afternoon I heard a commotion from my bedroom and went down the hall. Our apartment door opened onto the lounge. Standing there, Mr. White said, "You're busy watching him again. What's the matter with that boy anyway? Danny's very sick." "What? Can't you let him off the leash for one night?" "I'm sorry." "So he's old enough to grow a moustache but can't wipe his own F-wording arse." After Mum slammed the door, we made eye contact. She asked how much I heard. I said everything. I could tell by her tone she was upset, so I gave her a big hug. I told her if Mr. White made her cry again, I'd beat him up, and that made her smile. Then I said I'd tear his stomach open and rip his innards out, and she told me I'd gone too far. Yeah. A few days later, I got startled awake by somebody pounding on the door. My brain clouds meant it was hard to follow what happened, but Mr. White kept screaming the word dog over and over. In the morning, Mum wouldn't tell me about their argument, but Amanda came over with a bottle of wine, like the kind they serve at the hotel. Mum told me to go to my room, but I hid in the hall instead. Mr. White was annoyed about the yappy F-word running around her apartment. He said he heard a dog's toenails click across the floor, which would be his roof. Amanda heard this and knew he meant Benji, but was terrified. What would happen if Mr. White found out? "Benji's all I've got," she said through tears. Mum hugged her and told her not to worry. Mr. White started causing lots of trouble. Mum said she always smelled alcohol on his breath, and when people had too much alcohol at the hotel, that's when the doormen kicked them out. One night, I woke up to Mum screaming, "Do you see a doggy bowl anywhere around here? Or how about a leash?" Blood was thumping in my ears and their loud voices were so painful. I squeezed my eyes shut and silently counted to 10, making my mind blank until my head stopped hurting. In the morning, Amanda brought us cookies. "I don't understand how he can still hear Benji," she said. I've soundproofed the apartment." She offered to help with our rent, but Mum said no. She said Mr. White was probably just making excuses to be angry because she wouldn't F-word him. Later, she explained to me we needed to stay on our best behaviour because that B-word would have used any reason to evict us. By the way, I'm not self-censoring, it's literally written F-word and B-word, okay? In April, Mr. White started pounding the door one night. I got up and went to the lounge where Mum was looking through the keyhole. She whispered for me to go back to bed, but I didn't want to leave her. I had my phone in my hand. I mouthed the word police, but she winced, like she'd been punched in the gut, and shook her head. I heard a noise of a key in the lock. Then Mr. hand and then knocked me to the floor. He kept hitting me and hitting me. Then he lifted the corner of his shirt and I saw a knife. But before he could grab it, Mum jumped on his back. He slammed her backwards against the wall, and for a second it looked as if he was going to kill her, but instead he spat in her face. "One more problem and you and that F-wording moron are gone," he screamed in her face, then stormed off. Afterwards, Mum was so upset she couldn't speak. Amanda came over, and when she saw blood everywhere, said we needed to call the police. Mum freaked out. She got all serious and said, "I need to tell you something." Amanda stitched up a cut on top of my skull and then gave me some tablets to make it not hurt anymore. Afterwards they told me to stay in bed, but my head hurt so much I couldn't sleep. I lay there tossing and turning until I needed to use the bathroom. From the kitchen, I heard Mum and Amanda's voices and peeked through the gap in the door. Amanda looked surprised. Mum showed Amanda something on her phone. After that, Amanda walked around while Mum kept saying, "It's true." Then Amanda agreed not to call the police. She said she'd help change the lock so Mr. White couldn't get in. Because I couldn't work for a long time, bills started piling up on the kitchen table and Mum bought a different kind of Coke, one that didn't taste as good, whenever we went shopping. She started biting her nails too. Every time I thought about Mr. White, I got angry. Then I felt bad for feeling angry. I said we should call the police so they'd come and arrest him. But she said nobody would believe us and we'd just get evicted anyway. So I had the idea to install a security camera. That way if he caused more trouble, we'd have proof. After my bruises healed, I worked extra hard at the hotel until I'd saved enough money from tips. I installed the camera on the cabinet in the corner. I angled it so you could see the front door, the wall, part of the sofa and the window at the front of the apartment. I knew Mum would be furious if she found out what I'd done, so I hid the power cable behind a row of dusty books she never read. It wasn't long before I felt the storm cloud setting in again. I spent several days in bed with Mum bringing me my meals, until one night I woke up drenched in sweat, twitching and whining. From somewhere nearby I heard Mum scream. It felt like I might explode and the haze got way, way worse. After that all I remember is darkness. I woke up in bed with vomit all over myself. I cried and called for Mum, but she didn't appear. I dragged myself into the lounge where her and Amanda mopped the floor. Mum reacted like she was watching a scary movie when she noticed me. The front door wasn't sitting right and the lamp was broke. "What happened?" I asked, confused. She practically marched me into bed. She said she didn't want me making my condition worse, but I could tell from her voice she was keeping a secret. A big one. She dabbed my head with a wet cloth, promising there was nothing to worry about. The second she left me alone, I pulled up the camera footage on my phone. It started with Mr. White hammering the door, his voice muffled and unclear. Mum begged him to leave. There was a sound of him trying his key, and then his voice got even louder. The door bounced in its frame until it crashed open and slammed against the inside wall. Mum threw her arm across the doorway, creating a barrier, but Mr. White backhanded her to the floor. She threw her arms around his waist and prayed like people do in church, and for a second it looked like he might leave. Then I crawled into frame and hit his ankles with my hands. I was so sick I don't even remember doing it. Mr. White grabbed my hair and pulled out his knife, but before he could use it, Mum grabbed a lamp and hit him on the head. so he grabbed her by the throat and pushed her up against the wall. I crawled out of the frame crying. Mum's eyes bulged out of her skull and her face went bright red, and I thought she was going to die. But then a grey fuzzball hit him and sent him tumbling across the floor. The grey thing took up a lot of the frame. I couldn't make it out so well in the dark, but some clouds must have gone away, because lots of moonlight shone through the window, and I realised it was a really big wolf. Its mouth was like a cavern, and the sharp fangs sank into Mr. White's scalp, and then blood poured down his face. The wolf turned to Mum and licked her hand. She ran her fingers through the thick fur on top of its head. A little later, Mrs. Armstrong appeared in the doorway. At first, she looked shocked. Then Mum waved her over and she approached the wolf nervously, and she scratched the wolf behind its ear. Afterwards, Mum buried her head in her hands, sobbing. Amanda grabbed a severed arm and waved it like a stick, shouting, "Here, Danny," until the wolf followed her out of frame. Amanda returned with a bucket and mop. I scrolled ahead in the footage. The two of them got rid of Mr. White and then cleaned until I appeared asking what happened. Now I'm still there in bed, and honestly I am so scared. I don't think the wolf would hurt me, because it didn't hurt Mum or Amanda, so I think maybe it only hurts people who cause trouble. I guess she didn't want me to call the police in case they found the wolf. I don't know why Mum wouldn't tell me about it though. I know animals get weird around me, but I think we'd maybe be good friends since we have the same name. I'm nervous we might get evicted, but maybe not because Mr. White is dead. I love Mum more than the world, so I'm obviously not going to do anything to get her in trouble, but I'm still really scared and confused. Anyway, thanks for reading my story. Hopefully I figure things out soon. That was very good. Not to brag, I kinda caught that pretty early on. I mean, maybe it was the fact that I think when it was they were saying about the Mr. White was complaining about the dog feet and how Danny was ill or whatever. But that was very cleverly written, actually. I probably enjoyed that one the most. That was good. So yeah, that one was probably the least scary, but probably the best story in my opinion. But let me know which one you enjoyed the most and which one you found most scary. Yeah, I think that's gonna do it. It's definitely my bedtime, so really hope you did enjoy this video. If you did, if you could leave a like, that would be amazing.